You know that terrifying feeling when the world just stops? It's like your ears are packed with cotton, and the only sound is the frantic rhythm of your heartbeat. That is what happened to me on a bleak Tuesday when Brenda from HR slid a paper across her desk. A 60% pay cut, effective immediately. I just sat there staring down at the numbers, hoping they might magically rearrange themselves. 60%. It wasn't a typo. I forced my mouth into a professional smile. "I'll need 24 hours to consider this offer," I said, my voice sounding hollow. The breakdown happened 12 minutes later in my car. I sat in the dimly lit parking garage for nearly an hour, gripping the steering wheel and taking heavy breaths. What is a man supposed to do when the company he has poured 11 years into decides his livelihood is worth less than half of what they paid him yesterday? I'm Henry Gallagher. I'm 55 years old, a widower, and a single father to a 14-year-old daughter named Chloe. Up until that meeting, I was the director of enterprise accounts at Apex Solutions. It has been 3 years since that day, and my chest still tightens when I talk about it. If you're watching this, do me a favor, hit the like button or drop a comment. I need to know I'm not just shouting into the void, that there are other people out there who understand this crushing agony. I started at Apex when it was barely more than a pipe dream operating out of a leased industrial park space. It was a startup environment. 20 exhausted but passionate people. We had the ping pong table nobody used and the exhausting culture of changing the industry. I worked 60-hour weeks. I stayed late, missed Chloe's recitals, postponed vacations. I did all the toxic things you aren't supposed to do because you believe in the vision, and I was good at it. Within 4 years, I managed our top dozen accounts, the clients that reliably brought in over 70% of Apex's revenue. I knew their legacy infrastructure, their operational bottlenecks, their spouses' names. These weren't just business transactions. They were genuine relationships. When my wife passed away suddenly 7 years ago, those client relationships became my anchor. They were my lifeline, providing the financial security I desperately needed to raise Chloe alone. By my 8th year, I was promoted to director. I had a loyal team of 10 account managers. I had equity. More importantly, I had a base salary of $140,000 that meant I could afford the mortgage and put away money for Chloe's college. I could finally breathe. Then, Titanium Corp., a massive conglomerate known for aggressive acquisitions, bought Apex Solutions. I remember the all-hands meeting. Elias Vance, our founder, spun corporate buzzwords about exciting next chapters. He walked away with an $8 million payout and a one-way ticket to his new compound in Montana. The rest of us? Our hard-earned equity was converted to titanium stock options that required 4 more years to vest. The first 6 months under titanium weren't an immediate bloodbath, just a slow strangulation. Then the redundancy assessments began. First, they targeted junior staff, then middle management. Every few weeks, an email would circulate about streamlining efficiencies. The next morning, a desk would be empty, no farewell lunches, just ghosts in cubicles. I kept my head down and doubled my output. My team of 10 was slashed down to 4, yet our client load multiplied. I was back to working absurd hours, fielding panicked emails at 2 a.m. Chloe started asking why I was always glaring at my laptop screen. Still, I convinced myself I was bulletproof. I controlled the relationships that brought in the revenue. They needed Henry Gallagher. That delusion held right up until Brenda from HR sent me a calendar invite. I should have known I was walking into an ambush when I saw Gavin Thorne sitting next to Brenda. Gavin was an optimization executive from Titanium's headquarters. He wore a Rolex he desperately wanted you to notice. "Henry," Gavin said, "we've identified a strategic opportunity to realign your compensation package with current market standards." Market standards. That was when Brenda slid the paper across the desk. The new salary figure was printed in bold ink, $56,000, down from $140,000. "This adjustment reflects the evolving nature of your role," Gavin continued. "We are centralizing client management at our headquarters. You will be transitioning into a regional support capacity." I translated the corporate speak instantly. "We are taking your clients and gutting your paycheck, but we still expect you to do all the heavy lifting during the handover. You will maintain your current responsibilities during the 12-month transition period," Gavin added smoothly. "Of course," I muttered. We need your signed decision by tomorrow morning, Brenda said, avoiding my gaze. If this new structure doesn't align with your goals, we understand completely. But we will immediately begin searching for a candidate whose expectations are in line with our new model. They knew my situation. They knew I was a single father with a teenager and a mortgage. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a hostage situation. I need 24 hours, I said, my voice steady despite the panic in my skull. Gavin nodded, pleased by my lack of resistance. Brenda exhaled a quiet breath of relief. I don't remember the walk to the parking garage. I just remember sitting in my car, staring at the concrete wall, and realizing that Titanium Corp wasn't just trying to cut costs. They were trying to break me. I was still sitting in my car, staring blankly at the concrete pillar when my cell phone vibrated. The caller ID flashed a name I hadn't seen in over 8 months. Fiona Lynn. Fiona was a senior accounts manager who had worked under me before jumping ship shortly after the Titanium Corp acquisition. I almost ignored it. My brain was too busy calculating how long my savings would last on a $56 Zealand salary while trying to keep Chloe's life undisturbed. But a reckless impulse took over. What did I have to lose? Hey, stranger, I said, forcing a normal tone into my voice. Henry, Fiona said, skipping pleasantries entirely. I have been trying to reach you all week. Have you checked your messages lately? I hadn't. I'd been too busy playing defense with Titanium's constant policy changes and keeping my legacy clients happy. Listen to me, Henry, Fiona continued, her tone urgent. I'm at Vanguard Tech now. You know they're Titanium's biggest competitor in the enterprise space, right? My CEO has been asking about you constantly. We desperately need someone with your high-level client relationship experience. Are you open to a conversation? I looked up through my windshield at the building in front of me. At the top, the old Apex Solutions sign had been torn down, replaced by the sterile logo of Titanium Corp. I thought about Gavin Thorne and Elias Vance sitting on a mountain of cash while the people who built his company were slaughtered. Actually, Fiona, I said, a conversation sounds exactly like what I need right now. I knew it, she said, vindicated. Things over there are finally hitting the fan, aren't they? Worse. They just demanded I take a 60% pay cut, but expect me to keep managing the entire portfolio. Fiona went dead silent for 3 long seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was laced with disgust. Those absolute vultures. Give me 10 minutes, Henry. I'm texting Julian right now. Julian Pierce, the CEO of Vanguard Tech. A ruthless but respected industry veteran who had been fiercely trying to pry my clients away from Apex for 5 years. 15 minutes later, my phone rang again. An unknown number. Henry, this is Julian Pierce over at Vanguard Tech. Fiona tells me we need to sit down immediately. His voice was direct and completely devoid of corporate jargon. Julian, I replied, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. I believe we might be in a unique position to help each other. I'm assuming you're aware of the post-acquisition bloodbath happening at Titanium? I've been watching the fallout with extreme interest, Julian said. How does 7 a.m. tomorrow sound? We can meet at the Silver Diner out on Route 9. Fiona mentioned you have a pressing deadline tomorrow morning. 7 works perfectly, I said. When I pulled into my driveway, the house was quiet. Chloe was already asleep, her chemistry textbook open on her desk. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her breathe. I had missed dinner again. I was failing her to serve a company that had just placed a $56,000 price tag on my loyalty. I walked into my home office, shut the door, and booted up my laptop. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was calculating. The first thing I did was dig out my original employment contract from my Apex Solutions onboarding 11 years ago. I scanned the dense legalese, looking for the trapdoor. There wasn't one. Apex had been a scrappy startup when I joined. They hadn't bothered with ironclad non-compete clauses for early hires. Titanium Corp had ruthlessly forced new contracts on recent hires, but they had dragged their feet on repapering the legacy executives. It was a massive oversight. But I needed more. Titanium's behavior over the last few months, the slow drip of firings and forcing me into a 60% pay cut. It wasn't just cruel, it was strategic. I pulled up a browser window and started reading. I'm no lawyer, but you don't spend decades in corporate America without understanding labor laws. What Titanium was doing felt systematic. They were a massive corporation. If they executed a mass layoff, it would trigger the Warning Act, the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. The Warning Act mandates that large employers provide 60 days advance notice of mass layoffs, or they are legally on the hook for 60 days of back pay and civil penalties. Titanium was trying to dodge the Warning Act entirely. By forcing senior staff into constructive dismissal, slashing our pay, altering our job duties, and making the environment intolerable, they could claim we left voluntarily. No mass layoff on paper, no 60-day notice, no Warning Act penalties. It was a calculated legal evasion designed to save them millions while bleeding the legacy employees dry. I closed the browser, the pieces clicking together in my mind. They thought I was an aging account manager who would tuck his tail between his legs and accept the scraps. They had severely miscalculated. I opened a secure drive on my personal computer and began reviewing my private client files. I wasn't stealing corporate intellectual property. What I was reviewing were my own personal relationship matrices. 11 years of hard-earned knowledge. I knew that Diane Rossi, the CTO at our biggest account, hated Titanium's new automated ticketing system. I knew which clients were up for contract renewals and their exact frustrations with Titanium's plummeting service quality. This knowledge didn't belong to a faceless corporation. It belonged to the man who had spent a decade building the trust that held those contracts together. I finally went to bed at 3 a.m., but I didn't sleep. By the time the sun began to peek through the blinds, the fear was entirely gone. In its place was a cold, sharp clarity. I got out of bed, showered, and put on my best charcoal suit. I made sure my tie was perfectly dimpled. This wasn't the suit of a man going in to beg for his job. This was the armor of a man going to war. I woke Chloe up, made her breakfast, and dropped her off at the high school. "You look fancy today, Dad," she said. "Big meeting?" "Something like that, kiddo," I smiled. "Have a great day." "I love you. Love you too," she said, slamming the door. I pulled out of the drop-off lane and merged onto the highway. It was 6:30 a.m. My ultimatum with Titanium Corp was set for 9 a.m. But before I dealt with the executioners, I had a breakfast date with the enemy. The Silver Diner was exactly what you'd expect at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday. Quiet and smelling faintly of stale coffee. I spotted Julian Pierce and Fiona Lynn immediately. They were tucked into a corner booth, looking out of place in their sharp business attire. Julian stood up as I approached, extending a firm hand. He was a commanding presence with a shrewd, calculating look in his eyes. "Henry," Julian said, "I've heard a tremendous amount about you, usually from my own sales team, complaining about how impossible it is to pry clients away from you." I offered a tight smile as I slid into the booth. "Well, Julian, Titanium Corp seems determined to make your team's job significantly easier." Julian took a sip of his coffee. "Fiona gave me the broad strokes last night, but I want to hear it directly from you. What exactly is happening inside that building?" I laid it all out. I didn't sugarcoat the chaos. I detailed the impossible workloads, the evaporation of legacy equity, the toxic shift in culture, and finally, the ultimatum delivered by Gavin Thorne. 60%, Fiona whispered, shaking her head. "They are demanding you work for entry-level wages while managing their entire enterprise portfolio." "It's not just corporate greed," I said, leaning in. "It's a calculated legal evasion." I spent half the night going over their recent termination patterns. They aren't firing senior staff outright. They are systematically forcing us into constructive dismissal. Julian's eyebrows shot up. "Constructive dismissal? You think they're dodging a mass layoff designation?" "Exactly," I nodded. "If Titanium executes a mass layoff, they trigger the Warning Act. They'd be legally obligated to provide 60 days notice, comprehensive severance packages, and they draw a massive regulatory spotlight. Instead, they are aggressively slashing pay and changing job descriptions, making the environment so fundamentally intolerable that legacy employees are forced to quit voluntarily. No Warning Act trigger, they save millions." Julian stared at me for a long moment, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I knew you were the best relationship manager in the sector, Henry. I didn't realize you had a mind for corporate litigation." "When a company threatens my daughter's future, I do my homework," I replied coldly. Julian reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed folder. "Henry, Vanguard Tech has been waiting for an opportunity like this for half a decade. We know exactly what your client relationships are worth, and frankly, Titanium doesn't deserve your loyalty. I opened the folder, title, Senior Vice President of Enterprise Partnerships. Base salary, $185,000. Bonus structure, 30% annual performance incentive. Benefits, comprehensive family health care that would cover every single one of Chloe's needs. And a $40,000 signing bonus. I just stared at the numbers. It was almost 4 times what Titanium was trying to force down my throat. Julian, I started, my voice catching. This is fair, Julian interrupted smoothly. It is fair market value for the revenue you protect. When clients work directly with you, their retention rate is 96%. Diane Rossi at your biggest account? We know for a fact she explicitly wrote you into their last service level agreement. You aren't just an account manager, you are an indispensable asset, and Titanium is too arrogant to see it. Fiona leaned in, her expression turning serious. There's one more thing you need to know, Henry. The reason Titanium is trying to force you out without severance, they're offshoring the entire enterprise support division. My stomach plummeted. What? We have sources, Julian confirmed. Titanium's new VP of Operations ran this exact playbook at his last firm. He uses aggressive pay cuts to flush out the legacy talent, strings them along just long enough to train the overseas replacements, and then liquidates the entire department within 9 months. They aren't just cutting your pay, Henry. They are extracting your final ounces of value before they execute you. A cold, heavy silence fell over the table. I looked at the offer letter. They thought I was cattle willingly walking into the slaughterhouse. I need to be at the Titanium office by 9 a.m. to give them my answer, I said, carefully closing the folder and sliding it into my briefcase. If I accept this, when do I start? Monday, Julian said. I shook his hand. I'll see you on Monday, at 8:55 a.m. I walked through the glass doors of Titanium Corp. I strode past the rows of half-empty cubicles and walked directly into conference room B. Gavin Thorne was already there, scrolling through his phone. Brenda from HR was sitting next to him, radiating nervous energy. Henry, Zidane said, not bothering to stand up. Right on time. Have you reached a decision regarding the compensation realignment? I stood at the head of the long mahogany table. Before I give you my decision, I said calmly, I need some operational clarity. If I accept this regional support role, who will be managing Diane Rossi's account during the critical Q3 integration next month? Gavin waved a hand dismissively. We will be distributing those high-level touchpoints appropriately across the new corporate matrix. Is it? I asked. Because Diane Rossi specifically requested my direct oversight in writing. I'm concerned about client continuity. Those are Titanium's clients, Henry. Not yours, Gavin snapped. Now we need a simple yes or no on the revised compensation structure. I leaned in slightly. Tell me, Gavin. Is it true that Titanium is planning to offshore the entire enterprise support division within 9 months? The color instantly drained from Gavin's face. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Brenda gasped softly. Where did you hear that? Gavin demanded, defensive. That is highly confidential internal strategy. So it is true, I said, and you expected me to accept a 60% pay cut, effectively engaging in constructive dismissal, to help you evade Warren Act triggers, all so I could train my overseas replacement before you eliminate my position entirely. Gavin stood up, his face flushing crimson. You have no idea what you're talking about, Gallagher. This is standard corporate restructuring. It's illegal evasion, and it's cowardice, I shot back. You wanted my answer? Here it is. I pulled out my company keycard and tossed it onto the table. I quit, I said, effective immediately. Gavin blinked, completely stunned. Excuse me? You can't just quit. Company policy mandates a 2-week transition period for director-level personnel. Check my original Apex Solutions contract, Brenda, I said. It explicitly states that in the event of a base compensation reduction exceeding 20%, all transition requirements are null and void. Furthermore, since Titanium never presented me with a non-compete agreement upon acquisition, I am a completely free agent. Brenda was frantically typing on her laptop. She looked up, pale. He's right, Gavin. He's not bound by our new terms. Gavin's face contorted with genuine fury. You've just made a catastrophic error, Henry. If we find even a shred of evidence that you are attempting to poach Titanium's clients, we will bury you in litigation. We will ruin you." I smiled, a real, genuine smile. "I haven't taken a single piece of proprietary data, Gavin," I said softly, turning toward the door. "But the trust and the relationships I've built over the last 11 years, those belong to me, and we'll see exactly what they're worth." I walked out of conference room B. For the first time in 9 months, I could breathe perfectly. I walked back to my desk, my heart hammering a triumphant rhythm against my ribs. The floor was eerily quiet. News travels with the speed of light in a dying company, and my remaining team members, Sarah, David, and Marcus, were already standing by my cubicle, looking like they had just watched a ghost walk through the wall. They knew. Of course they knew. "Is it true?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with panic. "Did you really tell Gavin to go to hell?" "In more professional terms, yes," I said, pulling a cardboard box from under my desk. "I'm leaving, guys, right now." David looked terrified. He had a newborn at home and a mortgage he could barely float on his current salary. "Henry, what are we supposed to do? If they're forcing you out, check your personal emails at 6 p.m. tonight," I told him quietly, keeping my voice low. "All of you, just hold tight until then." I packed my life into that single cardboard box in less than 10 minutes. 11 years of my career reduced to a few framed photos of Chloe, an award, and my favorite ergonomic mouse. As I placed the final photo in the box, two burly security guards in dark uniforms materialized at the end of the aisle. Standard Titanium Corp operating procedure. They were treating me like an industrial spy rather than a man who had generated millions in revenue for the building we were standing in. I didn't let them rush me. I picked up my box, gave my team one last reassuring nod, and walked to the elevator with my head held high. I didn't look back when the glass doors slid shut behind me. When I finally reached the sanctuary of my car, I didn't drive away immediately. I made 3 phone calls that would detonate the bridge I had just walked across. The first call was to Julian Pierce. "It's done," I said the second he answered. "Gavin threatened to bury me in litigation, but I am officially a free agent." Julian chuckled, a rich, booming sound. "Let them try. Vanguard's legal department has been bored for months. Enjoy your weekend, Henry. Your new laptop will be couriered to your house by tomorrow morning." My second call was to Elias Vance, the founder of Apex Solutions who had sold us down the river. He picked up on the third ring. "Henry, good to hear from you." "I'm out, Elias," I said flatly. Titanium tried to force me into a 60% pay cut under the guise of an alignment, dodging a Warren Act trigger so they could offshore the whole department in 9 months. "I quit this morning." A heavy, guilty silence filled the line. "Damn it, Henry. I had no idea they were going to gut the legacy team like that." "I don't need an apology, Elias," I interrupted. "I need you to do one thing for me. When Titanium's legal team inevitably calls you crying about me poaching clients, I need you to explicitly remind them that you specifically refused to implement non-compete clauses at Apex because you believed in earning employee loyalty. Your exact words." Elias sighed. "You have my word, Henry. I'll make the call myself." "I'm sorry." I hung up without saying goodbye. The third call was the kill shot. I dialed Diane Rossi, the chief technology officer at our largest enterprise client. "Henry," Diane answered crisply. "Tell me you have the updated Q3 integration timeline." "Diane, I don't have the timeline," I said. "I'm calling to inform you that as of 9:15 this morning, I am no longer with Titanium Corp." There was a dead, stunned silence on the line. I could practically hear the gears grinding in Diane's brilliant mind. "What do you mean you aren't with them?" "We are 2 weeks away from a critical infrastructure migration. I specifically wrote your oversight into the SLA. Titanium is shifting all enterprise accounts to a centralized, regional support team. I couldn't guarantee the level of service your account requires under their new model, so I resigned." "Without telling us?" Diane's voice dropped an octave, turning instantly frosty. "Who is taking over my account?" "Gavin Thorne informed me they will be distributing the touch points across the corporate matrix." "I'm sorry, Diane." Diane let out a curse. 20 years in this industry and these corporate suits still think we are just numbers on a spreadsheet. "Where are you going, Henry?" "Vanguard Tech," I said simply. "I start as Senior VP of Enterprise Partnerships on Monday." "Vanguard," she repeated, the frost melting into rapid calculation. They are our designated backup vendor. Send me your new contact information the second you have it, Henry. Do not wait. I will, I promised. By the time I pulled into the high school parking lot to pick up Chloe, my phone was a radioactive block of notifications. I had 32 unread emails and 14 missed calls. Most were frantic messages from my former team, forwarding panicked emails from Gavin demanding transition documents that didn't exist. 2 were from clients who had already heard the rumors. Chloe climbed into the passenger seat, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Why are you smiling like that?" she asked. "You never smile on a Wednesday." "I quit my job today, Chloe," I said. Her eyes went wide with panic. "Dad, what? What about the house?" "I start a new job on Monday," I interrupted gently. "A much better job. Better hours, better insurance, and a lot more money." "They tried to bully me, kiddo. They tried to tell me I was worthless." And I walked right out the door. Chloe stared at me for a second before a massive grin broke across her face. "That is incredibly badass, Dad." That evening, as I was cooking dinner, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, bearing a New York area code. I answered. "Is this Henry Gallagher?" a deep, authoritative voice asked. "Speaking. Henry, this is Wallace Bancroft, CEO of Titanium Corp. I believe we have a highly sensitive situation on our hands." I froze. The CEO of the entire conglomerate. A man who managed a massive empire from a glass tower in Manhattan, calling my personal cell phone. "Mr. Bancroft," I said, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I just received a very disturbing phone call from Diane Rossi," Wallace said, his tone razor sharp. "She is threatening to pull a $25 million contract because she claims my executives are secretly gutting the enterprise support team to offshore the division. She also mentioned you resigned because Gavin Thorne tried to force you into a 60% pay cut." "Diane is a very perceptive woman," I replied coolly. "Henry, let's stop playing games. Gavin is a middle management hatchet man who clearly overstepped his mandate. I did not authorize a 60% reduction in your compensation. We cannot afford to lose the Rossi account. What is it going to take to get you back in that office tomorrow morning?" "I'm afraid that's impossible, Mr. Bancroft," I said. "I've already accepted a senior VP position with Vanguard Tech." The silence on the other end was heavy, dangerous. "Henry, I strongly advise you to reconsider. If you attempt to leverage our clients to a competitor, our legal team will pursue you for breach of fiduciary duty and IP theft. We will tie you up in litigation for the next decade." "Let me be perfectly clear, Wallace," I said, dropping the formalities. "I haven't stolen a single line of code or a single proprietary document. Furthermore, if your legal team even breathes in my direction, I will personally file a whistleblower complaint with the Department of Labor regarding Titanium's coordinated constructive dismissal strategy designed to deliberately evade the Warren Act. I have the emails. I know exactly what you are doing to avoid paying severance. Do you really want that regulatory audit right before your Q4 earnings call?" Wallace Bancroft didn't say a word. The threat hung in the air, absolute and undeniable. "Have a pleasant evening, Mr. Bancroft," I said, and hung up. There was no lawsuit. Wallace Bancroft was a ruthless corporate shark, but he was also a pragmatist. He knew a losing battle when he saw one, especially one that came with the devastating threat of a federal Department of Labor investigation into his company's blatant Warren Act evasion tactics. The moment I mentioned the regulatory audit, Titanium Corp's legal hounds were called off completely. I never received a single cease and desist letter. The fallout at Titanium, however, was spectacularly brutal. By the time I walked into Vanguard Tech's stunning, sunlit corporate headquarters, on Monday morning the dominoes had already begun to crash. Gavin Thorne's mandate was unceremoniously terminated. He was quietly let go by the end of the week, forced to pack his expensive suits into a cardboard box and escorted out by the very same security team that had marched me out the door. Brenda from HR vanished shortly after, officially pursuing other opportunities. The massive offshore transition plan was completely abandoned. The panicked executives at Titanium suddenly realized that you can't outsource complex enterprise relationships to a call center without bleeding revenue. They desperately tried to backpedal, immediately adjusting salaries for the remaining legacy staff to actually match the market standards they had lied about just days prior. But for Titanium, it was far too little and much too late. Exactly 1 week after I settled into my spacious new office at Vanguard Tech, my former team, Sarah, David, and Marcus, submitted their resignations simultaneously. Titanium practically begged them to stay, offering massive retention bonuses, but the trust was entirely broken. I had already secured budget approval from Julian Pierce, and all three of them were sitting in Vanguard cubicles by the following Monday, earning 20% more than their previous salaries. Then came the clients. Diane Rossi didn't just threaten to pull the $25 million contract, she executed the termination clause with terrifying precision. The integration team Titanium sent to replace me fumbled the initial technical assessment so badly that Diane's board had the legal justification they needed to break the contract without paying a dime in penalties. Within a month, her company's entire enterprise infrastructure portfolio was officially signed over to Vanguard Tech, and she wasn't the last. 3 months later, another massive legacy client, frustrated by Titanium's plummeting service quality, jumped ship to Vanguard. 2 more followed in the third quarter. I didn't have to poach a single one of them. I was meticulously careful never to initiate contact or solicit their business. I didn't have to. In this industry, true relationships are the rarest currency. When you spend over a decade proving your reliability and protecting your clients' interests, they notice when you disappear, they talk, and eventually they follow the talent. By the end of my first year at Vanguard Tech, I had brought over nearly $60 million in recurring revenue. Julian Pierce didn't just pay my bonus. He promoted me to Executive Vice President of Global Partnerships. It has been 3 years since that suffocating Tuesday afternoon in Brenda's sterile office. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, I sit back and think about that pivotal moment. I think about that single sheet of paper sliding across the desk, demanding I surrender 60% of my worth to a company that saw me as nothing more than a disposable line item. They truly believed they held all the cards. They thought my age, my mortgage, and my responsibilities as a single father made me weak, desperate, and compliant. They couldn't have been more wrong. My life now is unrecognizable from the crushing anxiety of my final days at Apex and Titanium. I manage a brilliant, highly compensated team of 30 account directors. I have an office with a door that closes and a view of the skyline. The financial security is incredible. Chloe's college tuition is already sitting in a fully funded, high-yield account, untouched and waiting for her. But the real victory has absolutely nothing to do with the money or the title. The real victory is the fact that I am home for dinner every single night at 6:30 p.m. I haven't missed a single one of Chloe's debate tournaments or track meets in 3 years. When she needed help studying for her AP chemistry exams, I was sitting right there at the kitchen island with her, not glaring at a laptop screen, fighting with a client over a botched service ticket. A few months ago, I bumped into Elias Vance at a massive tech summit in San Francisco. He had aged significantly, despite his millions. He bought me a drink at the hotel bar, looking genuinely remorseful as we caught up. "You know, Henry," Elias said, swirling his bourbon, "leaving when you did was the smartest damn move you ever made. I should have protected the legacy team during the acquisition. I let the Titanium executive convince me it was just business." "It's never just business, Elias," I told him, echoing the cold reality I had learned the hard way. When you're dealing with people's livelihoods, their families, their dignity, it is always deeply, intensely personal. Treating it as anything else is just an excuse for cowardice. He didn't have a response to that. He just nodded, quietly sipping his drink. The truth is, my revenge wasn't about financially crippling Titanium Corp., though I won't pretend I didn't enjoy watching their stock take a hit when they lost the Rossi account. It wasn't about getting Gavin Thorne fired or outsmarting Wallace Bancroft with the Warren Act. The purest form of revenge was discovering my absolute, undeniable value. It was having the courage to stand up in a room full of people who are trying to diminish me, looking them dead in the eye and saying, "No, I am worth significantly more than this." And then having the audacity to walk out the door and build that reality for myself. We all have a power. Sometimes it gets buried under mortgages, medical bills, and the sheer exhausting weight of trying to provide for the people we love. Sometimes a faceless corporation systematically beats it out of us until we forget what we are capable of achieving. Sometimes We just need to be pushed right to the absolute breaking point before we remember how to fight back. So, if you are sitting at a desk right now, feeling trapped in a job that fundamentally disrespects you, if you are working for a company that expects your unquestioning loyalty while actively planning your demise, hear me now. You are not trapped. You have options. You have undeniable worth. You hold far more power than the executives sitting in the corner offices want you to believe. Do not let them dictate your value. Do not let them quietly force you out the back door to protect their profit margins. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't about destroying the people who tried to break you. It is simply about walking away, knowing exactly what you are worth, and building an incredible life without them. And sometimes, realizing that power only takes one defining moment, a 60% insult, and a single, life-changing phone call.